Hey there, this is Neena Perez, and this is Straight Talk, no sugar added. Thank you so much for watching. This show is created to discuss life topics and hopefully challenge and transform your thinking. Today, I have a very important person with me today. I really respect her. Her name is Ginger Wilk, and she has a master in counseling and has been doing pastoral care counseling for about 20 years now, and works for a nonprofit as a clinical manager. And today we are going to talk to her about different things like how this pandemic has affected people's personalities, the mental health issues, perceptions, and things like that. So first, Ginger, I would like to start with you introducing yourself to our audience so they know who you are. I mean, you were on this show before and we discussed a very important topic about relationships.
Yes.
So now we're going to actually talk about individuals and what they're going through this pandemic. So why don't you give us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. I have had a lot of experiences through the years in just working with people in the social service field. I'm fascinated by people, absolutely captivated by who they are, what makes them tick, how they react in situations. I've worked in residential treatment centers for teenagers, adolescents, in the foster care system or struggling with substance abuse. I've been on staff in ministries as the director of pastoral care. I've done some of my own counseling personally, and I work for a nonprofit now, have been for 10 years, that really is focused on transitioning people out of the criminal justice system. And so I have worked with males and females and people in prison and people in Harlem and, all different walks of life. And I am just, fascinated by, what it really takes to kind of encourage people to, keep them from, getting overwhelmed in life with whatever they're going through. And with the diversity of reactions, which is, why, the topic that I know you'll introduce in a moment was really pressing on me, because I know I've always said that, there can be a situation where, a bomb could go off in somebody's house, just to take an extreme example, right? A bomb could go out in somebody's house and, small one or whatever, and people could come and interview the entire family. And you could have 5 different perspectives on that one situation. We know that one thing happened, but one person could, say, oh my God, it was the worst thing ever. Another person could say, what bomb? What happened? I didn't see the bomb.
That's true.
And another one could be like, well, it wasn't that bad. It was minor. So that's definitely the way that, there's truth for sure. There's truth about what's going on, but perceptions make a very big difference in terms of trying to help individuals getting through, their tough times. So.
Yeah. And it's funny because it doesn't mean that all of them are not true, right? The situation is true, but the perceptions are all different. That's so interesting. So I wanted to talk about the topic, which is how this pandemic has affected people based on their individual personalities, the mental health issues, the perception, because it is true that there are extremes even in this pandemic, right? And this is new territory for all of us. Like none of us have ever been in this type of situation, right? So we've all had issues, right? We had 9/11, we had all those things that really impacted our lives and other, diseases that have come on the scene throughout the years, but nothing where it shut down the world, So this is different for everyone, and it causes fear and it causes anxiety and a lot of things. And so what I wanted to talk about first, or we'll touch on, is personalities and the way that introverts and extroverts have the propensity to interact and in these times. Like, what are their challenges during this quarantine?
Yes, exactly. So the way that, there's so many elements, but the short way of looking at how an introvert and extrovert is defined or are defined is by how they refresh. So an extrovert, for the most part, is refreshed by being around other people. They are exhilarated and energized by being in the face of other humans. Of course, everybody needs to rest and everybody can get overwhelmed, and it depends on what humans, right? Because some humans can be very taxing to be around at times. But so extroverts, for the most part, are going to be just absolutely looking for those opportunities to interact. And introverts refresh by being alone. So although everybody's created to be around others, an introvert needs to be able to just be alone in a space where they can regroup and refresh and energize, and then they're ready to be around people again. So in the midst of this quarantine, which happened very abruptly. Wasn't like we had, time to really prepare for it. It literally just came upon us so quickly. And there have been, a variety of reactions, being an introvert versus an extrovert, as to how you handle the quarantine. Extroverts are looking for every opportunity to be able to just be around people in a way that you can do it legally, so whether that's the one that goes to the grocery store, just to be able to talk to the person that's bagging their groceries, or going for a walk and talking to the neighbors, just to be able to have that interaction, and definitely would enjoy being with family, would enjoy being with people, and it would be very difficult for an extrovert to be alone, during this time. And for an introvert, very difficult to be trapped in a household where there's a lot of people around all the time. You can't really find space. But by the same token, a lot of introverts are saying this quarantine has actually worked out very well for me, because I've been able to limit the forced situations to be around people every day by going to work and doing different things. So, it's just interesting how, some of them will say, I know this has been tragic and, I would never wish this on anybody, but as far as for me personally, the quarantine part of it, it's been good for me, said by an introvert. So.
Right. Yeah, by an introvert, for sure.
Yes.
Not by an extrovert.
Not by an extrovert.
No, I'm so over this. I can't even tell you. And it's because I am an extrovert, right? So I want to be around people. I'm a hugger. I like to be out. Before I interview, I was at a boot camp, right? Because I wanted to get people out. And I actually got a group, I think, of about maybe 18 people out there on the field. We weren't, we're 6 feet apart in the whole thing, but it's just, I need people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to talk about the personality of being structured and unstructured, and how this, this pandemic has affected those people.
Yes, it's been very difficult because for the most part, people are either working remotely or there's a lot of people that are unemployed. So it's keeping people home for the most part. Obviously there's plenty of people that are going out still, but for those that are stuck at home, it's difficult, because if you are a structured person that thrives on it, and most people do thrive on having, a day and a calendar that is set with tasks and purpose and a beginning, a middle, and an end. But in the quarantine, the days just roll together. There's barely weekends, really, except for the fact that you don't have to log on if you're working remotely, or, it's a day you won't be looking for a job, maybe, but for the most part, the things that define our weekends, don't define our weekends right now. And, it's moving in the right direction. But so for somebody who is, thrives on structure, it's very, very difficult. It's probably a lot easier for people who are more spontaneous and are able to kind of, go with the flow, to be able to kind of, jump in and out of working remotely, or to, kind of be able to multitask at home, but if it's a person that really thrives on structure, it's going to be very, very difficult. And also overall structure and having some sort of, a calendar and a set of tasks to do is really the best way to keep our mental health, at a good place. So when there's nothing that's there, it's really, really hard to kind of keep that depression away or anxiety away,
And that's not a fun place to be. And you're right. And we're going to touch on it, but, it does affect your mental health when you're not structured.
And a lot of people are mentioning that they're having a hard time focusing, that although they're making really good attempts at being able to, whether it's look for employment or whether it's to, work from home, get on, log on, or whatever the case may be. But even people that are actually going out to work, they might be kept, focused because they have a lot going on. But for some reason, the focus, and I think also too, looking at what's going on around us, we might feel like we're handling it okay, but it's a very scary time, and that's affecting our ability to concentrate as well. So
that's a good point. And a lot of times we don't really realize that we are hyper focusing or trying to ignore it, but it's affecting us.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure. And this is a really peculiar time too, because even if you're trying to ignore it, you really can't. You know, you walk outside and it's a different world, right? I mean, people are wearing masks and they're wearing gloves and people are barely interacting or talking to you. It's a very different, it's just a different feel. And for an extrovert, that's very hard, you know, 'cause it's hard for me to say good morning or want to talk to someone and they are not even interested because they're like, no, you gotta stay away 6 feet, don't talk to me, don't breathe, you know, that kind of thing, right? So another thing I've noticed too, talking to a lot of people, is how this has affected energy levels, right? So people who have high energy are struggling a little bit because this is like, this slowdown is really affecting them, you know? And then people who are low energy are becoming lower energy, you know? And even like, it's same thing with even the high energy people. I've noticed that a few of them have completely stopped working out, stopped walking, stopped doing anything. And it's affecting them emotionally. Right? So I wanted you to touch on a little bit about how this is affecting people with the natural high energy and people with very low energy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember when I was doing work with trying to get mentors to be working with, you know, young girls that were in prison. I did a lot of research on what is a good, you know, what denotes a good volunteer and a good mentor. And what they were saying is that the busier that a person is, the more effective that they are in doing volunteer service. Because originally when I started looking, I was like, well, let me just try to get people that have a lot of time on their hands. But statistically, they were saying that, you know, now obviously it's not so busy that you can't squeeze something in, but that the more productive people are, the more productive they are, meaning that they can absorb other tasks. So to be productive at work or productive at whatever it is that you're doing, even if you're an at-home mom and you're running a household, you're doing different things like that, or an at-home dad. But then after that, you know, there's that schedule, then you're going to go to the gym and then you're going to go shopping and then you're, you know, going to make snacks for the kids for soccer practice or whatever it is like that's going, then there's time for ministry or volunteer service in the community. So the more busy we are, the more energized we become to be able to give out. So the opposite is true as well. And, you know, obviously I'm not an expert statistically on this, but it seems to be the case that the more we slow down, the more time we allow ourselves in, the lack of productivity will happen. And we've noticed that too with, you know, even with children, right, that go to school during the year. And then in the summertime, if they don't have a lot going on, they tend to really just become, you know, very, you know, lackadaisical in the way that they approach things. They're relaxing, but, you know, days can go by where there's really nothing that gets accomplished. And so it's very similar to this time. You know, it just, you start to kind of give into a schedule that we've just had to release ourselves to. And there was never the intention for us to get to be non-productive, but it's just kind of what goes with it. So that's why one of the suggestions that I would have is that you try to put structure into something that isn't structured right now. If you're still working from home or you still don't have, you know, whether it's you get up at a certain time and go for a walk and then, you know, you schedule a time that you're going to do a quiet time and, you know, schedule a time that you're going to touch base with other people, have, you know, Zoom conversations and different things like that, force interaction, you know, also schedule some things for recreational activities at the end of the week, so that there can be, so that you can actually anticipate circumstances that are going to start bringing that energy back into our bones, you know, so.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I don't know if anybody's really, you know, keeping an eye on this, but I've noticed that with kids, you know, they're having like meltdowns, you know, like this is really hard for them to be home now, you know, getting up in the morning, going right on a computer. You know, to be on a computer for whatever many hours it is. I know that my oldest grandson, he's 10 now or 8, he's like, you know, having tantrums all of a sudden. Like, what are you having tantrums about? You know, our neighbor's kid, she said, I don't know what's going on. She's 5 years old. She's reverting back to being 3. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, it's that, like what you're talking about, it's that high energy, you know, keeping busy, structure, right? Because you get them up in the morning, you get their breakfast done, you take them to school. They know they got school, they got friends, it's recess time. Not anymore, right? It's getting up on the computer,
Yes.
And it's this is not good. This is
Yeah, no, it
not
definitely
good for
isn't.
them.
It's very imperfect. It's the best of what can happen in the midst
Yeah,
of this, but
of
there's a
course.
lot of fatigue that comes from being online, just
Yes.
sitting on a computer. We already know that the educational system, is learning that they need to add a lot more interactive type learning, touching things,
Yeah.
going on field trips and not having 6 hours in a classroom. So then in this situation,
Yeah.
it's not only 6 hours in a classroom, but it's on a computer, so there's definitely some difficulties. And true, people that have small children, their children are the ones that actually give them the structure. They have their own structure as well, but it kind of, the whole household kind of revolves around that. And that's been difficult too, because in the midst of everything else that we've talked about, people that have young children that are learning are frustrated because now they're the teacher, and they're getting thrown into things that they never expected to. And then there's plenty of households where, economically, they're struggling. We just tried in the nonprofit, we helped a client because, his cable bill was overdue and they were going to shut it off and there was no Wi-Fi for the child to be able to learn. And, so, you look at that plus on top of economically, how it's even harder on people. So it's been a lot of different elements that have kind of added to the fatigue and hopelessness,
Yeah, and that's interesting you even brought that up. I never thought of that, but you're right. Economically, how if the Wi-Fi goes down, that kid can't study. Wow, that's true. Everything affects something, right?
Correct.
And you also had made a point about being somebody who needs tasks or performance based, right? Versus a person who just is people based. So talk about that a little bit. About that personality.
Yes, because I think the people that are task-based will have an easier time for the most part in the quarantine if they have tasks that they can come up with. So then they can kind of put up with, even if it's cleaning out a closet, going out and doing some gardening, just coming up with things in the midst of their day or their weekends that they can do to just keep them from kind of, going insane for the most part. But people that are people oriented are really struggling with the way that this is set up, as far as most things being remotely, defined, because, your whole purpose, your whole field, or your whole, career might be based around having those connections, whether it's clientele and sitting down, whether it's counseling people or being a case manager or, being a pastor of some sort, or even clients in finance. It's the face-to-face. It's really being able to, get the heart of what's going on with that person, to assist them. And all of that has been cut off. And like you said, nobody wants to hug. Nobody even wants to look at each other these days.
Right.
I mean, people do, there are definitely different reactions, but, it's a time right now where people are afraid to be around one another, and so when you're people oriented, it's just heartbreaking, to be in this, because everything that most places are delegating out that you do when you're working from home is going to be tasks. Like, well, if we can't, meet with clients or meet with people or whatever, we can work on the files right now. We can do task. It's kind of delaying the people stuff. And that's very, very hard. Somebody like that is going to crave the time where, we're going to be able to kind of interact with one another again, if that makes sense. So
yeah, has that made it challenging for you as a counselor? I mean, doing everything remotely. I wonder if that made it more personal, like you and that person on the video screen, or if it severed that a little bit. How did you feel about that?
I mean, it's definitely better doing, a FaceTime or a Zoom, versus phone calls.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true.
Definitely used to do phone sessions every now and then if somebody was, out of town or whatever. But it's still hard, even, I was meeting with a couple a few weeks ago, and it's so hard to be able to see clearly the interactions. Like, you can get it, but you can't really look into the eyes the way that you want, or to understand even some of the body language, whether they're jiggling their leg, or whether, they're even the way that their hands might be going, reacting. to the other person or to what's being said. You can get a lot, but it's just not the same. And I think that it definitely would be very hard with a new person to be establishing a new relationship with somebody through this. It's better when there's already been a relationship and this is just kind of a temporary thing. But yeah, it's extremely difficult. It's a substitute for now, but it's very much an inadequate substitute when it comes to really being able to, touch humanity the way that you want to,
Yeah. And especially if you're that kind of person that wants to be around people and touch,
Yes.
and touch and hug and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. So when we come back, I want to start talking about the mental health aspect of this. Okay. And perceptions and things like that, because those things are super important. Don't you dare miss it. So, hey guys, thank you so much for watching. This is Neena Perez and this is Straight Talk. We have been talking to Ginger Wilk and she has her master's in counseling. So we've been talking about personalities, and now I wanted to touch on mental health because it is something that we are all experiencing at some level.
Yes.
And so I wanted to talk about anxiety and that feeling of anxiety. I used to suffer from anxiety many years ago, and I remember that feeling of lack of control. You know what I'm saying? Or feeling trapped, obsessive qualities. I used to have like a little bit of OCD type of thing. Worrying about yourself, worrying about your family, worrying about others, friends, that kind of thing.
Yes.
So if you don't mind touching on anxiety and what you've seen, and also maybe some advice about anxiety, please.
Yes, exactly. Well, first and foremost, there's a spiritual nature to anxiety as well, which is fear. And that's a spiritual thing. That's something that people can apply prayer to. That's something that can be, with the utilization of scriptures and things like that, meditations, that part of anxiety can definitely be helped, as it pertains to the spiritual. But then, anxiety is, a very, very clear-cut mental health issue that many times needs to be treated with medication, which I know a lot of Christians have a hard time with sometimes with really being able to accept that, but it works, the right type of medication works. But anxiety is something that, it can worsen in the midst of a situation like this, a pandemic. One thing that I noticed was, through 9/11, that was a time where some of the people that I had been meeting with and ministering to had their anxiety under control. But when 9/11 happened, it just began to, just be reinvented again, all over again, because, there was this illusion that, our country was completely safe. We fell asleep at night feeling like we were completely safe. And when 9/11 happened, that just blew away that mindset. And so when there's that going on in the world around us, it begins to kind of, the circle, kind of gets tighter and tighter and tighter into, well, now is this safe or is this not safe? And then am I safe within my household? And then, it just becomes this circular set of thought patterns. And like you were saying, worrying about yourself, worrying about your family, or sometimes with anxiety, it can attach to whatever's in front of you. And it can get to the point where it becomes paranoia, because the mind, our minds can rev up to a point where we can create, a reality that isn't there because of that level of anxiety. So, and also anxiety can be triggered very easily by senses, sight, smell, sounds, different things like that can trigger off anxiety many times because they're associated with traumatic events that have gone on. And so with anxiety, the big thing about anxiety is making sure that we have control, like you were saying. So some of the people in the middle of this pandemic, their control is, okay, I'm going to get the groceries, I'm going to bring them home, and I am going to scrub those groceries down. And that's going to be my task because, I cannot be bringing this virus into this household. And that's their way of getting control. We know that this is a time where we really don't have control. We can't, the only thing that we can do is the stuff we can do, which is stay home and all the rest. But we can't control the numbers. Even the people that are in the highest of places that know the most about this, are still watching the trends. They don't have an absolute about exactly what's happening. They're just doing the best that they can. So with anxiety, it's just going crazy. Having people be trapped in the house is really hard for people that struggle with anxiety, because, some people that are anxious would choose to be home versus choosing to be out around those that have germs on them. But most people, the idea of you telling me that I can't go out, that's how sometimes that nervous energy is able to be, rectified, is just by, having purpose and, being able to just escape reality a little bit. And, whenever we feel trapped, it's going to bring anxiety to, even for people who don't struggle with it.
Right. Those are such good points. And there's also something I've noticed with this anxiety is agoraphobia.
Yeah.
I noticed that I've spoken to some people who are literally petrified of coming out of the home at all.
Yes.
And I mean, they've been in the home for months.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm just like, oh, this is so not good.
Yeah.
Right. But how do you get them out? I mean, it's really difficult, especially because I feel that sometimes there's too much information.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So, and too many voices giving the information in the news and social media, your friend, your neighbor, whoever, there's too much information. And so, yes, we should be informed, but I think that a lot of these things can really cause this overwhelming anxiety and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And now people are becoming a little bit agoraphobic, where they're just not even going out at all, like at all,
Yes.
And it's like, go outside on your deck, go take a deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost afraid to even breathe the air, and it's just like, oh man, that's just not good.
Exactly. And, I had a revelation a couple of weeks ago when I was meeting with a client who was kind of falling in that category. And the revelation was about, biblically speaking, the generation with Moses in the desert. When they were in the desert, they had some very, very real diseases and health concerns that they had to attend to. And that's why a lot of, like Leviticus and all these it's all these rules about when people are menstruating and when there's, circumstances where there's something that's unclean, how to deal with it, all these lists of rules and regulations. And some have to do with spiritual things, but a lot of it had to do with when you have hundreds of thousands of people all in one area in tents, there is going to be an outbreak of disease or different things like that. And so during that time, it was very structured. It was very clear cut about making sure that everybody was obedient to those rules. And then when we transitioned to Joshua, the way God spoke to Joshua was be strong and courageous, because now they were getting out of that desert and they were starting to go into the promised land. And so I feel like this is the shift that's happening right now with this pandemic, is that we had to be in that Moses place. We had to. But this is a time where we have to be strong and courageous. And being strong and courageous doesn't mean being stupid and just disobeying the law or whatever the restrictions are. And even sometimes, even if there are things opening up and you really feel like you're not ready for that, that's okay. Like, everybody has to make their own decisions. But this is a time where we do have to start stepping out a little bit and be bold and courageous, because we're going to have to come together again, in these stages. So wherever someone is at, if like you said, if they've been in the house and haven't gone anywhere, and it's just to sit out on their deck or to go for a walk, that's a huge victory. And if that can be done a few times a week, then that's great. For other people, it might be actually going to the grocery store. For someone else, it might be sitting outside at a restaurant if they feel comfortable doing that, if they feel like they can. But I definitely think that that's going to be a way to combat the fear that goes along with this time.
Yeah, this is a very scary time for a lot of people. And I'm very grateful to God that I don't suffer with anxiety like I used to many, many, many moons ago, because I think this would have been very hard for me, so I'm very sympathetic to people who are going through that, because that's this is a very difficult time. And I, along with anxiety, of course, as comes depression.
Correct.
Right. And so in depression, I think we touched on it before about the lack of structure can sometimes bring on that depression, because you feel like there's nothing, Like there's nothing that you can control, nothing that you do, nothing is being put in a way for you to know that you have to go from A to B to C. And I think that's also why animals are important, like pets.
Yeah.
Because even if you're like at home and you don't have your job now or whatever the structure is that's kind of like went away, at least a dog, you got to get up, you got to walk it, you got to feed it, it gives you structure. And I think maybe that's why, service animals are so important.
Yes, exactly. Pets have been huge during this time.
Oh my gosh, there's like no pets left in the the shelters, which is amazing. That's wonderful.
Exactly.
And I was thinking that's great because people probably wanted to do this for a long time, and this has probably brought out a lot of depression and anxiety people didn't even know they had, because we get so busy with life and situations and circumstances that we don't realize, wow, wait a minute, when I have all this coming at me, I'm actually feeling a little down, or I'm feeling anxiety here. I didn't even, I suppressed this for so long, and here it is.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's happening. So let's talk a little bit about depression and how, being disconnected, this was important, and you wrote this, the disconnection from a support system, right? The lack of exercise, the impact of fear, overeating, all that kind of stuff. Let's touch on that.
Yes. And so, again, depression, same thing. There's, a spiritual element to depression as well, which is a spirit of heaviness, right? And that's something that, meditating on scriptures, songs that bring ministry to our soul, can be very helpful. But again, just like anything else, we're mind, body, soul, spirit, will, and emotions. We're not just spiritual beings. Right. We have very real things happening in our bodies. We have very real things happening in our minds and in our hearts. And depression, is really, defined by me, right? Is a sea, like a sea of sadness. It's like when David said in the Psalms, why so downcast, oh my soul? That was what he said. And that's a perfect way. I truly believe that David, the psalmist, struggled with depression. Because so many of what he talks about, so many of the things that he says is about that, and he's being very real and transparent, which I think is really important for people that struggle with depression or any struggles, to be transparent. But, why so downcast, oh my soul, is saying, I'm sad, but I don't know why. And that's what's so hard about depression, is because depression, it's, at least when we're angry, we can define it. It's anger is very productive, even though it can certainly, take a wrong turn in the way we react towards anger. But when we're angry, we kind of have a defining, reason why we feel the way that we feel. But when we're depressed, it's just this sea of sadness that doesn't really seem to have any definition to it. And so how do you solve that? How do you get into that place and to be able to say, well, if this is what you're sad about, then this is what's going to help you. And so it's hard to get out of that pit, and it can be something that causes a spiral. And so what we know that helps depression, obviously spiritually, I mentioned about that praise, worship, meditation on the scriptures and things like that. David encouraged himself in the Lord. Also, obviously, other than medication, because many, many times there needs to be medication. But with depression, productivity helps, structure helps, exercise helps, same thing with anxiety, getting our bodies tired so that our minds are not going so much. We're not, losing sleep or sleeping too much. Exercise can really help to keep that solid. Also, getting outside of ourselves, because with depression, you can become very self-absorbed. The rest of the world sort of disappears and it becomes focused mostly on you. And in a time like this, there's plenty of opportunities to be able to be kind and to be generous and to think about the people that literally, are getting a phone call, a FaceTime from ICU and saying goodbye to a parent that they can't even hold their hand. 100,000 people have died, in our country during this time. And so as hard as it is, and I'm talking about to the people that haven't been one of those persons that have lost somebody, but if you're in depression, like there are people that need groceries delivered. There are things that we can do. And if we begin to get outside of our worlds, that can help to lift depression quite a bit. Again, you know, an emotional support animal is helpful. Reaching out to people, connecting with the support system, even though we can't physically be with them. You know, setting up a Zoom call, you know, Zoom situation where we can talk to them. You know, just having to really force ourselves to be able to get those things back in our diet. It's kind of like, you know, if you're used to eating really, really well, and then now you're in a place where you're only eating rice, you know, you have to supplement, right? You have to take vitamins, whatever it is. In a time like this, you have to supplement for the things that are going to help to lift depression. So
yeah, those are very good tips, and very true. I used to again struggle with depression, and that was, you know, one of the things I realized, that I was very self-absorbed. I really was. Everything was woe is me. It really was. And it's hard to get out of, though, Ginger, I'll be honest with you. And sometimes when you are somebody who struggles with depression for quite a bit of time, when you do find the freedom of it, you almost don't know who you are, you know? So I think your tip about going out and serving someone else is so important, because that's what happened with me when I, you know, found the Lord in my life, and I started praying about my depression and stuff, and it lifted. One day I actually felt it kind of lift, and then I didn't feel depressed, and I almost did not know who I was.
yeah.
As weird as that sounds, I'm like, oh no, now what? You know, it's like, no, this is a part. It was like a part of me, and I think I almost liked being depressed. Does that make sense? I mean, yeah. So I think we got to be careful with that trap. We got to be very careful with the trap of this pandemic is not an excuse to stay depressed.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
because if it were me years back, I probably would have used it as an excuse to stay depressed, you know, because it was a part of my life. It was something that I, you know, knew. It was comfort, you know, as much as it is not, it is. It's, you know, it's kind of a weird thing to say, because I don't really know how to articulate it properly, but, you know.
It makes a lot of sense, definitely. And also, I mean, people can take advantage of, you know, the telehealth, like counseling appointments, like during this time, because, you know, what's nice about being able to talk to a counselor is that, you know, it's not weighty on the family or on the friends that, you know, tend to get frustrated too, because, you know, they don't know how to help, you know, and sometimes it makes it worse. Sometimes family members can make matters worse by their input. They're trying, they have the, you know, best of intentions, but they're not necessarily being helpful. And it's a safe place for that. And also too, I would regulate the amount of contact with, you know, the news and the social media that would help to raise anxiety or to cause depression to worsen. You know, it's always better, you know, earlier in the day when we have more energy, that would be a time to kind of, if you want to check the news and all that other stuff. And then as it gets closer to bedtime, you know, kind of try to, you know, put something into your life that is going to distract you or calm you down. You know, there's plenty of things like, you know, whether it's a diffuser with essential oils or lighting some candles and, you know, some smells and sounds that are going to be soothing. You know, comedy.
Journaling is good.
Journaling is very helpful. I encourage some people to even tap into the arts, whether it's, you know, write a slam poem or, you know, write about yourself, but put it in the third person as if you're talking about a different character. Sometimes that's easier to kind of do, you know, just give it a name and talk about Sally, this and that. And sometimes it's easier to be able to discuss those things that way. Comedy is also something that's helped me working with a lot of hearing sad stories from clients and different people, finding like good, clean comedy and just being able to laugh, finding ways to be able to just laugh. Laughter is so therapeutic. And, you know, we just, you know, I think a lot of times we just don't even think about how much that's apparent, you know, that it's helpful to our lives. So
true. I'm a big laughing. I love to laugh. I love to laugh. So I've been doing the same thing. I think I'm binging now Cheers or something like that. Like I have to laugh. So I agree with you. I mean, that was really good. Thank you. That's a great information. Really good. I want to switch a little bit about I know you're not a big social media person, like you're not out there all the time. I barely ever see you like on like Facebook or anything like that. So I don't think I ever have. But I wanted to talk to you about something that I have been seeing a lot of, which is perception, right? And there's so many different analogies and stories and memes and everything else about, is this God or is this the devil? Is it the end of the world? Is this even real? Is this fake? Is it a conspiracy? Is it a this? And there's a lot of perceptions out there. And of course, you'll always find people that'll be stronger with one and then stronger with another. I think we're also losing a little bit of ourselves being kind to one another. If your perception is different than mine, then I'm going to be mean to you type of thing I'm seeing a lot. And I don't like that.
Right.
But I wanted to talk to you about perception, and you brought up like all these amazing points. So the first one I want to talk about, is this God or is this the devil, and the perceptions in that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a Christian in the Christian body, and these are perceptions from people even outside of that faith, but I've been in this within the Christian body since I was 11 years old, basically. And so, lived through a lot of different fads and phases of things that have gone on, and the way that people within, especially in the evangelical circles, react to events. And it's just been amazing to me how many different perceptions have come across, whether it's through, preaching that I've seen or heard, or through, obviously social media, which I am told about. And also most of where I get my information from is just talking to people and just listening to what they have to say about it. And one thing that I've learned is that whenever there's a tragedy, there is a certain amount of people that automatically sort of want it to be, all right, well, this is God. This is God, flexing his muscles against, the wicked, or whatever, he's angry because of the condition of this particular country or this particular, group of people or whatever.
Sure you haven't been on social media? Are you sure?
Yeah, I haven't. I have not. Only bits and pieces that my daughters give me, because they're friends with a lot of people that that I have known in the past, and they'll say, well, this one's saying this or this one's saying that, but it's very rare. So we always want to do that, and it's just interesting to me why, because if that's the type of God that we serve, then we really don't understand what the whole reason why Jesus died on the cross. And we don't understand the fact that everybody has struggles with a lack of righteousness. Everybody has sinned, and fallen short of the glory of God, and everybody is loved by God. So when we want to paint God into somebody who just wants to come and strike down the earth, then we're going to have to put ourselves into that, because that would be against us as well. We're not more special just because we read the Bible or whatever the case may be. So there's always that element of wanting it to be God. And it's petrifying. And also to me, it's so difficult to understand why that type of mindset would be out there in the sense of, aren't we trying to understand a loving God who loves everybody and wants everybody to draw onto who he is and not be repelled because you're in that group or whatever. So that's caused a lot of stir. And then when we talk about it being, the enemy, and it's all, a satanic force, I mean, we know that obviously sickness and all of those things, like, don't come from God or whatever the case may be. But also too, sometimes I think we give, Satan way too much power. Like he is not an equivalent to God, but on the evil realm, he was an angel that was thrown down from heaven. He was disgraced from heaven. He was never on the same level as God, but somehow it's like, oh, God versus the devil. Absolutely not.
They put them on equal planes.
Equal playing field. No, and God is not going to bow down to this demonic force who someday the world is going to look at him and say, this was the one who deceived the nations. Like, right. Are you joking me? Like, this is the thing that deceived the nations and that we were afraid of. We're going to be appalled at how small and how, like diseased this, being is going to be. And so I think we give way too much power, and that's what gives the fear. I mean, how petrifying is it to think that the God that you love is the one that's doing this horrible thing. And then there's an enemy out there, if you have that belief, and that enemy has so much power that God can't intervene. That's petrifying to think that, all right, I have God in my life, but he's really powerless.
Yeah,
So both of those perspectives are really flawed when you look at the extremes. I think that, the most important thing that people need to really look at is that this is a very real thing that's happening. I mean, look at the statistics, whether they're not updated exactly the way that they should, or, there's not the amount of tests that should be taken, or, there's definitely, and every place you look, it says it's not updated. It's not this, like, when you look at it, and even, I have a friend who is the chief of a staff in a hospital, and she says that she thinks that the statistics and the media coverage of it have been pretty accurate, as it pertains to the numbers that are coming in as they're coming in. And so that's coming from somebody that's administratively over an entire hospital and is able to see that. So it's a very real thing that's happening. But I think the problem is that in the midst of all of this, where people are responding to this by wanting to put some sort of a label on it. And, it's so difficult for people to be able to, I think, to come to the point where it's like, we don't really know what this all is. And this is tragic. And there's been tragedies before, and there's going to be tragedies again. And as much as it's difficult for us to sleep at night, knowing that that's a reality, we have to look at it head on in order to get the grace to deal with it. So
yeah, I mean, and I've gone through both. I'm gonna be honest with you. I've gone through, this is God doing this because we need to like really realize that he is God, and then, is it the enemy? I mean, I went through that. And then I said, well, first of all, I thought about Job when he was questioning God, and God said, where were you when I created, the heavens and the earth? And I said, you know what? How about I don't make a call either way? You know what I'm saying? Like, how about I don't make a call? How about I am a person, I am a Christian, and so my job is to pray for our people, pray for our nation, pray for my family, and God is God, and that is it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I am not going to make a decision one way or another. It's like when people try to say, well, you're saved, but you're not. Well, I'm not God, and I am not going to make that decision, So that's how I felt about that too, about, is this God? Is this the devil? Yeah, at first I think we try to make sense out of things that make no sense, right? So that is the way the human brain is. You try to make some sort of sense of what's happening.
Yes.
And then you just come to the realization that, well, A, you have no control, and B, you really know nothing, so so you might as well just know that. And if you know that, it takes you a longer way. You have less depression, less anxiety, because you're not leaning fiercely one way or the other. You're just trying to stay even keel.
Yes. And keep in mind, we still didn't have any answers from Job, like all that happened,
exactly.
There's
God
still,
never answered it.
there's still been discussions over the years about what really ended up happening. And what we do know is that there were a lot of people that were saying a lot of false things.
Yeah.
And that's why, that in fact, this is actually the title of this book that I'm trying to write right now is Darken Not, because the scripture, when God comes in and speaks to Job, he says, who is this who darkens my counsel? Right. And then he goes on to talk to Job about basically, like you said, were you there? Like, just stop trying to figure me out and just understand. And Job, the most important thing that Job said in the midst of that entire book was, for I know that my Redeemer lives. Yeah. And that's really the only thing that we can stand on in times like this, is that we know that our Redeemer lives and that he's going to bring redemption. His name means the Lord God Redeemer. So there is going to be redemption. Sometimes it's on the other side of things, it's in the heavenly realm. Sometimes it's in the earthly realm, but people darken God's counsel, and God has wept over every person that has died in those ICU units, that have been on those ventilators, whether they know him or they don't, whether they have spent their lives seeking him, serving him. He has wept over everyone. He's wept over every person that has had to say goodbye, that has screamed and screamed in their households because they've had to say goodbye remotely to a loved one. God is grieved over, the lack of being able to be together and, all of the things, being able to worship together and all the rest. But God will always bring redemption in every situation. He will always bring redemption. And so in this situation, to focus on where this is coming from, spend a lot of time listening to conspiracy theories about what's going on, is that really fruitful? Because I haven't seen it bear fruit in any of the people that have gone down that road. Yeah. Where I've seen people bear fruit, we have good friends that, run the food bank in the Bridgeport area, and they're delivering to hundreds and thousands of people all the time, like day in and day out, they're delivering food. And, there's so much to do. There are so many people that need prayer. There are so many meditations, whatever is good, whatever is honorable, whatever is pure, whatever is true, think on these things. So if you do have a theory and you're interested and fascinated by it, then look for the truth in it. Stop going and listening to everybody's opinions and research it. And if you're going to research it, get some really good, diverse experts to, read on, Christian and non-Christian, get outside of one particular group of people and do your research if you really want to come up with a theory. But at the end of the day, try to figure out, is this really bearing any fruit,
Yeah, I mean, one last one I want to touch on is, well, you touched on it a little bit, is the conspiracy, right? Or is this real? Is this fake? Is this whatever?
Yeah.
I can tend to sometimes roll with those things, because I get like ticked off about certain things, and different news media giving you different news and stuff. I'm like, this is a conspiracy. I'm telling you, it's an election year. It's a conspiracy, And then I have a friend who lost their father-in-law to COVID, and they had to say bye to him virtually, right? And then you go, or they had to do the funeral arrangement virtually, and then you go, oh wait, this is real. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you don't know, is it real? Is it conspiracy? And again, I think I go all the way back to, I'm just going to be in prayer, because I actually do not know.
Yes.
I mean, is this the end of the world? What do you think, Ginger? Is this the end of the world?
It's funny because I can remember back in the 80s when me and my husband got married, we thought it was the end of the world then. Yeah. And I remember we had a Revelation Bible study together, a bunch of couples, and we were all thinking, well, why should we even have children? Because, it's going to happen. The same answer then is what I have now, is that we are not going to know the day or the time. And so all I know is that, being productive in prayer and knowing this loving God that we have, because he is a loving God. He is a loving God. And really being able, if we're going to share God with people, then we should share God in a way that people are going to want to know him. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that don't want to get attached to a lot of this junk. They think that this is crazy. You know what I mean? I think that this is insane. And the way that we can show our concern for God and the way we can prepare, I think, for whenever the end is going to come is by transforming the way that we're thinking and the way we're becoming very exclusive and the way that we're becoming very divided. Yeah. There's so much division right now politically, right within the evangelical circles. There's so much division, complete, extremes on both ends. I think that this whole pandemic is just causing there to be, like you said, a lack of kindness, people clinging to their extreme beliefs, whatever they are, people trying to have control and defining this whole thing with whatever it might be. What is the source, and the truth is that, there's a natural and there's a spiritual, and the natural, they're figuring out the source, and eventually they're going to get to it. Eventually it's going to get nailed. But we can be praying for those people. We can be helping to raise funds, for research. I mean, there's so many things on a day-to-day basis that we can be focusing on as we get ready. And, so I don't know when the end of the world is going to come, but I don't think we're ready.
You have the answer, Ginger. That'll tell you, I've seen so many conspiracy theorists saying, well, this happened, so the world is coming to an end. I'm like, God said nobody in heaven or earth would know when the time is coming. So we should just keep each other in prayer and be careful about what we are focusing on. You said something pretty poignant. You said how people perceive it is going to drive either fear, paranoia, faith, wisdom, compliance to authority, and affects one's mental health. Mm-hmm. So whatever that it is, right now we are in this pandemic. So that is really a big it right now. Yes. But we have to be careful how we're perceiving this time. This can be an also very good time. Like I've realized I've saved a little bit of money. Yes. I realized that I'm spending a little bit more time with my husband. Then I have a little bit more time to watch a funny show, like things like that, like, because I'm a very busy person. Yes. So it's been actually kind of nice. It hasn't all been awful. And I know for others it has been awful. They've lost their loved ones and they've lost their jobs and they've lost that sense of community, and that's hard for a lot of people. So it all of us have been affected in different ways, but you're right. How we focus on it is what's going to drive the rest of it, whether it's that mental issue, the fear, the anxiety, all of that stuff. So we have to be careful to also focus. It, to me, should be for me, because I'm a Christian, should be God. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? For someone else who isn't a Christian, I'm sure they have another way of focusing. For me, it is God. So I try to focus on Him. Yeah. So that the rest of it, is just outside noise. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So, Ginger, I want to thank you very much for being on this show. And for being here with us. Is there anything you'd like to close us out with?
I would just say, love never fails. Love never fails. That's what 1 Corinthians 13 says. And if there's one thing to cling to in this time, if there's one thing to operate under, regardless of where people's faith, lies, is loving the people that you're with right in your home, loving people that are going through suffering, reaching out to people, go through your contact list in your phone and shoot a text to somebody that you haven't talked to in a really long time, or whether you reach out to them on social media, like think about opportunities that you can love one another. I mean, I try when I go to the grocery store every time to say to the people that are standing there, checking out my groceries, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you. Just kindness and love is going to conquer everything. Loving one another in the midst of their very differing opinions about all of this. I think that's going to be the winning formula. And, I just think about, the scripture in Philippians 4 that just says, like I said, whatever is good, whatever is honorable, whatever is pure, think on these things, and the God of peace, will be there in the midst of all of this. But I think regardless, like you said, of where people's faiths are, if we are focusing on the good things and the kind things, and if we're focusing on things that are going to be productive, then it's going to bring health across the board. But I think you just have to ask yourself, what am I spending my time doing and thinking about, and how fruitful is it or not? Yeah. And that's going to be the key as to how we survive this time. And also too, it's not just about now. We're going to see the aftermath and the carnage of what has occurred during this time. And so we're going to be impacted by this for probably years to come. So to gear up to be that person of love in the midst of all of that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. You were so fantastic. That's why I love having you here.
Thank you for having me on.
I really appreciate it. And you guys, don't you forget to subscribe to our channel. It's Straight Talk, No Sugar Added. And if you need to reach out to me, it's hello@straighttalknosugaradded.com. If you have any questions that you maybe wanted to ask Ginger, just shoot me an email. I'll send it out to her. And then when she responds, I'll send it back to you. But thank you so much for watching. This is Neena Perez at Straight Talk, No Sugar Added. Make sure that you love one another, treat one another with dignity and respect. Let's get through this time together. All right? Talk to you soon. Until next time.